You know, when you think of Argentina, you think of a country that just seems to have it all, right? Amazing culture, vast fertile lands, incredibly talented people. And for a while there, it was a global powerhouse, a real beacon of promise. But its history is also this wild story of deep divisions, economic booms that always seem to turn into devastating busts, and a constant agonizing search for who it's supposed to be. That right there is the paradox of Argentina, a history of incredible highs and absolutely crushing lows.
All right, so to get our heads around this roller coaster of a story, we're going to break it down into 5 acts. We'll start at the very beginning, with the birth of the nation. Then we'll see its dazzling golden age, get to grips with the revolutionary age of Perón, navigate some really dark decades of instability. And finally, we'll look at the modern struggles with democracy and debt.
Okay, let's dive right in. Part 1. Birth of a nation. So how did a pretty remote Spanish colony end up becoming the proud Argentina Republic we know today?
Well, this story goes way back. After thousands of years of indigenous life, the Spanish show up in the 1500s. And for a long time, this whole area was basically a forgotten corner of their empire. But then, 1776, that was a game changer. Spain creates a new viceroyalty and makes Buenos Aires the capital, and suddenly the city starts to boom. So when Napoleon's wars rocked Spain back in Europe, the colonists here saw their chance, and they took it. The May Revolution in 1810 kicked out the Spanish leader, and just 6 years later, bam! Argentina declares independence.
So you'd think, hooray, independence, problem solved, right? Nope, not even close. Winning freedom from Spain just kicked off decades of a brutal civil war. The question wasn't about being independent anymore. It was about what kind of country Argentina was going to be. This was a fight for the very soul of the new nation. And it really boiled down to 2 completely different ideas. On one side, you had the Unitarians. They wanted a powerful central government run out of the wealthy port city of Buenos Aires. On the other side were the Federalists. They looked at the United States and said, hey, let's do that, a federation where the provinces have way more autonomy and control. This fight would define Argentine politics for a generation.
All right, moving on to Chapter 2, the Golden Age. And wow, what an age it was. We're jumping ahead to the late 1800s, and after all that fighting, Argentina just explodes onto the world stage. We're talking about it becoming one of the 10 wealthiest nations on the entire planet. Seriously.
So how on earth did they pull that off? Well, it was kind of like a perfect recipe with 4 key ingredients. First, a brutal military campaign they called the Conquest of the Desert seized huge territories from indigenous groups, opening up the insanely fertile pampas grasslands. Second, people poured in from Europe, millions of them, mostly from Italy and Spain, providing all the labor. Third, new tech, like refrigerated shipping, meant Argentina could send tons of grain and beef all over the world. And fourth, foreign money, especially from Britain, built a massive railway network to get all that stuff to the ports.
But here's the thing, all this incredible wealth, it was basically going to a tiny group of powerful families. The growing middle class was getting fed up. And then came 1912, and a law that was a total political earthquake. The Science Peña Law brought in universal, secret, and mandatory voting for all men. It completely shattered the elite's grip on power and, in 1916, led to the country's first truly democratic government.
Okay, so we're in the age of Perón now, and to understand him, you have to understand the mess Argentina was in. That new democracy didn't last. The Great Depression smashed their economy, and the 1930s were this corrupt, ugly period called the infamous decade. And into this chaotic scene steps one man, a charismatic army colonel named Juan Domingo Perón.
And this brings us to the million-dollar question, one that has defined Argentina for almost a century now. What exactly is Peronism? You hear this word all the time when you talk about Argentina, and trust me, it is not simple. It's not really left-wing, it's not really right-wing, it's just Peronism.
Okay, so at its core, Peronism is built on these 3 big pillars. It was super nationalistic. It wanted economic independence, taking control of things like the British-owned railways, but the real heart of it, the thing that made people adore him, was social justice. He championed the working class, the descamisados, or the shirtless ones, and delivered huge gains in wages, benefits, and union power.
And you absolutely can't talk about Juan Perón without talking about his wife, Evita. They were this incredible political power couple. If he was the strategist, she was the spiritual leader, the heart of the movement. She had this amazing connection with the poor, ran a huge charity foundation, and fought like a lion for women to get the vote, which they did in 1947. Together, they were an unstoppable force.
Okay, on to our next chapter,
the pendulum swings. And boy, does it swing. See, Perón had a bit of an authoritarian streak, and he made some powerful enemies. The old elites, the military, the church, they weren't having it. So in 1955, they kicked him out in a military coup. And that is when things get really, really chaotic for the next 30 years. Just look at this timeline. It's insane. It's like a political revolving door spinning completely out of control. You get a coup, then a weak civilian government, then another coup. And here's the crazy part. They banned Peronism, but it was still the biggest political force in the country. The whole thing was a mess. By 1973, things were so bad that the military actually let Perón come back, and he won in a landslide. But he died a year later, and in 1976, another coup plunged Argentina into its darkest chapter ever.
The military leaders gave their regime this clean, bureaucratic name, the National Reorganization Process. But the world would come to know it by a much more fitting name, the Dirty War. It was nothing less than a systematic campaign of state-sponsored terror.
30,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. 30,000 people. And these weren't soldiers in a war. They were students, journalists, union organizers, activists, anyone the government didn't like. They were kidnapped, taken to secret prisons, tortured, and murdered. They were the disappeared.
So by 1982, the dictatorship is failing. The economy's a wreck, and people are pushing back. So what do? They pull a classic move from the dictator's playbook. Start a war to distract everyone. They invaded the Falkland Islands, or the Malvinas. It was a massive, desperate gamble, and it backfired spectacularly. They were crushed by the British, and the humiliation was so total that the regime just collapsed.
All right, final chapter, democracy and debt. So, democracy is back. 1983, huge celebrations. But the party didn't last long. Turns out, getting rid of the military doesn't magically fix a broken economy or heal a deeply divided country. The old problems were still there.
I mean, just look at this chart. We're not talking about a little inflation here. We're talking about hyperinflation, almost 5,000% in a single year. It's unimaginable. Your entire life savings could be wiped out in a matter of weeks. It was an absolute economic nightmare.
And this kicked off what feels like the classic Argentinian story of boom and bust. In the 90s, they try something radical, pegging the peso 1-to-1 to the US dollar, and for a while it worked, but it was a ticking time bomb. And in 2001, kaboom! The whole thing imploded. The government froze everyone's bank accounts, the infamous Carlito. Imagine going to the bank and being told, sorry, your money's not yours anymore. It was a total catastrophe that ended in a massive debt default.
And if you look at the last 20 years or so, that political pendulum just keeps on swinging. You get the left-wing Peronism of the Kirchners for over a decade, then a hard swing to the free market right with Macri, then back to the Peronists, and now something completely different and radical with Javier Milei. It's just this constant, frantic search for a way out of the cycle.
And that really is the question at the heart of it all. How can a country with everything going for it, the fertile land, the brilliant people, the rich culture, get so stuck in this endless loop? It's the great Argentine paradox, and it's a question that Argentines themselves are still desperately trying to answer.
So that's our quick history of Argentina. What a ride, huh? If you enjoyed this, we've got a whole playlist of quick country histories you should definitely check out. And hey, while you're at it, hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world. Thanks so much for watching.